It all began one quiet weekend in late October. My husband Tom had suggested we visit his brother Eric at the family cabin tucked in the piney hills of Vermont. It was supposed to be a simple retreat, a weekend of warm fires, brisk walks through the woods, and shared laughter over old family stories. I was looking forward to it, but what I didn't realize was how profoundly this trip would affect me. The cabin itself was everything you imagine a secluded retreat should be: wood-paneled walls that smelled faintly of cedar, a fireplace crackling with warmth, and large windows that framed the golden hues of the fading autumn leaves. It was quiet, almost too quiet, and I liked it that way. I needed the calm. Tom and Eric had gone outside to stack firewood, leaving me in the living room, sipping a glass of wine and flipping through the old photo albums that littered the coffee table. I had always felt a gentle, easy warmth toward Eric. He had this calm, observant nature that made people feel safe, like he was quietly taking stock of the world before letting it in. But I had never thought much beyond the comfort of his presence. That weekend, though, I noticed subtleties: the way he lingered near the kitchen while I brewed coffee, the small smile when our eyes met, and the occasional touch on the back as he passed by. Nothing overt, just moments that felt heavier than casual familiarity. That night, after the fire had burned down and the house had fallen silent, I was about to head to bed when I heard a soft knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. Eric stood there, his expression unreadable but gentle. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I nodded, curious and cautious, and we sat in the living room with only the flickering embers for company. He leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Then, almost as if weighing the right words, he began. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something I should have said a long time ago." The truth he shared wasn't scandalous, at least not in the way most people imagine secrets. It was tender, almost painfully human. Eric confessed that for years he had carried an unspoken admiration for me. Not lustful, not intrusive, but a deep emotional connection he had felt quietly, always respectful of the boundaries of family and marriage. Hearing him articulate it in the stillness of that night, I felt something stir inside me, a recognition of feelings I hadn't dared to acknowledge myself. We talked until the small hours about life, regrets, missed opportunities, and the strange ways affection can linger quietly, unnoticed until the right moment. There was an intimacy in his honesty, a vulnerability that left me unexpectedly moved. It wasn't about temptation or betrayal. It was about acknowledging the truth of our emotions in a way that neither of us had dared before. By the time I finally went to bed, the cabin felt different. Not in a threatening way, but in a luminous, open way, like the air itself had shifted and created a space for understanding and connection. I realized that sometimes the most profound truths are the ones we've carried quietly, waiting for the right moment to be spoken aloud. And that night, I knew the journey ahead wasn't about secrets or mistakes. It was about navigating honesty, trust, and the rare human courage to say what's in your heart. The next morning, the cabin felt different, though nothing had outwardly changed. The sunlight spilled across the wooden floors, as if it knew the secret we'd shared the night before. I found myself lingering over breakfast, sipping my coffee slowly, listening to the birds and the faint rustle of leaves outside. Tom was in the kitchen with Eric, laughing over some old inside joke, completely unaware of the conversation that had unfolded while he slept. And I couldn't help but notice the quiet way Eric's eyes met mine across the table, a silent acknowledgement that yesterday had altered something fundamental between us. We spent the day hiking along the forest trail behind the cabin. The crisp autumn air filled my lungs, and I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. Eric walked beside me, matching my pace without speaking, letting the silence stretch comfortably between us. It was strange how ordinary moments suddenly carried weight: the crunch of leaves underfoot, the way the sun dappled through the branches, the simple act of sharing a path together. There was a closeness in our quiet companionship, a mutual understanding that didn't need words. Later, as we rested on a fallen log overlooking a small stream, Eric finally spoke. "I didn't mean to make things complicated," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I just couldn't keep it inside any longer. It felt dishonest to carry it silently while being around you, while you're married to Tom." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. "I understand," I said. "It's strange, hearing you say it, but it doesn't feel wrong. It feels human. Honest. That counts for a lot these days." There was a long pause, and then he reached over, gently brushing a stray leaf from my jacket sleeve. The touch was fleeting, respectful, and yet it sent a ripple through me that I hadn't anticipated. I realized then that what we were sharing wasn't about desire or betrayal. It was about recognition. Two people acknowledging something real in the quiet corners of their hearts, without crossing the boundaries that life had already laid out. Back at the cabin, as the afternoon sun dipped behind the hills, I found myself reflecting on my marriage and the life I had built with Tom. It was a good life full of love, trust, and shared history. But Eric's confession had awakened a new awareness within me, a recognition that emotional intimacy could exist in forms that weren't bound by convention or expectation. It was both liberating and delicate, a reminder that human connection often doesn't fit neatly into the roles we think we must inhabit. That evening, we gathered around the fireplace once again, the room glowing with amber light. Tom was recounting a story from his childhood, his voice warm and animated, and I caught Eric glancing at me with a quiet, almost imperceptible smile. There was no tension, no secret shame, only a subtle understanding, an acknowledgement that the night before had shifted something in our relationship. We were both aware of the invisible line we'd drawn, yet it didn't feel confining. It felt alive, like a fragile thread connecting us in a way that was profound and rare. As I went to bed that night, I realized I was carrying more than the day's events. I was carrying a sense of possibility, a quiet knowledge that honesty, respect, and emotional truth could coexist with love and commitment. It was a revelation that felt intimate and private, a secret that didn't need to disrupt, only to illuminate. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was learning something entirely new about myself. The next morning, the cabin was wrapped in a soft, misty fog, the kind that makes everything feel suspended in time, as if the outside world doesn't exist. I sat by the window with my coffee, watching the mist curl around the pines, and I thought about Eric, about the way he had trusted me with his truth, the way our conversation had lingered between us like a gentle current. It was a strange feeling, comforting, yet unsettling, like standing on the edge of something I couldn't fully name. We decided to spend the day exploring a nearby small town. It was quaint, with brick sidewalks, a market selling homemade pies, and a park where children kicked leaves into the air. Tom was cheerful, joking with Eric about some old rivalry from their youth, and I felt a wave of gratitude for the ordinary joy of family life. And yet there was an undercurrent beneath it all. Eric and I shared subtle glances, small exchanges, a brush of the hand when reaching for a bag of apples, a quiet smile over a joke that carried a weight that neither of us tried to define. At lunch, we sat outside at a small cafe. The sunlight filtered through the trees, warming our shoulders. Eric leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. "I've never said this to anyone before," he said softly, his voice carrying a mixture of hesitation and relief. "Not like I said it to you. There's something human about it, isn't there? Just being honest, even if it makes life complicated." I reached across the table, resting my hand lightly over his. The touch was brief, comforting, and filled with unspoken understanding. "Yes," I replied, "there's something sacred about honesty. And there's a kind of freedom in it, too. Freedom to feel and to acknowledge, without necessarily acting on it." I never expected to feel this way, but I'm grateful we can share it. The drive back to the cabin was quiet, filled with the gentle hum of the car and the occasional remark about the colors of the trees. There was a calm intimacy in that silence, a shared awareness that yesterday's revelations were not fleeting, but rather something quietly integrated into our lives. We didn't need to label it, define it, or even fully understand it. It existed simply because we had recognized it together. That evening, as we prepared dinner, I noticed Eric moving around the kitchen with ease. There was a rhythm to our proximity now, an unspoken trust that allowed us to coexist in a shared space without awkwardness or pretense. He caught my eye as I reached for a pan, and there was a moment of wordless communication, a recognition that our connection was alive, meaningful, but bounded by respect and care. After dinner, we all sat together by the fire. Tom had dozed off in his chair, a book forgotten on his lap, and Eric and I found ourselves alone again in the flickering light. There was no pressure, no expectation, only a quiet space where we could simply exist in each other's presence. "You've changed the way I see things," I said softly. "About honesty, about connection, about life, really." He smiled, the kind of smile that held gratitude, relief, and something tenderly vulnerable. "And you've reminded me that feeling deeply doesn't have to hurt. It doesn't have to disrupt everything. It can just exist. And maybe that's enough." As I climbed the stairs to bed that night, I carried with me a new understanding. Life was full of unexpected truths, quiet revelations, and delicate connections that didn't always fit neatly into the boxes we imagined. And sometimes the most profound experiences were those that were felt quietly, shared respectfully, and left unspoken in many ways. That night, I slept with a sense of clarity and calm, knowing that what mattered most was not the temptation of the heart, but the courage to honor what was real. The final morning at the cabin arrived with the soft light of dawn spilling through the windows, painting everything in pale gold. I sat on the porch with my coffee, listening to the distant call of a hawk and the gentle rustle of the trees. The world felt quiet, almost sacred, as if it too had been holding its breath for the past few days. Eric stepped out behind me, and we shared a comfortable silence, neither of us needing to fill it with words. As we packed our things later, I noticed how effortlessly our small moments of connection had woven themselves into the fabric of the weekend. The stolen glances, the gentle touches, the quiet honesty, they weren't secrets anymore in the sense of shameful or forbidden things. They were simply truths we had acknowledged and honored, and in doing so had deepened our understanding of ourselves and each other. On the drive home, Tom chatted about the upcoming holidays, completely unaware of the weight of the conversations that had quietly shaped our weekend. I glanced at Eric in the rearview mirror, and for a fleeting moment, our eyes met. There was gratitude there, a gentle acknowledgement that what we had shared wasn't about desire or betrayal, but about connection, honesty, and the rare courage to reveal a part of oneself that is usually hidden. After we returned home, life settled back into its familiar rhythms. Tom went back to work, the house hummed with quiet routine, and yet something inside me had shifted. I found myself more attuned to the nuances of human connection, more open to honesty, and more aware of the emotional richness that exists in even the most ordinary interactions. Eric and I continued to see each other at family gatherings, our relationship comfortable, respectful, and quietly profound. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic confessions, just an ongoing mutual respect and understanding that our shared truth had strengthened, rather than threatened, our bonds. One evening, I found myself reflecting on that weekend, the cabin, the fog, the quiet moments of revelation. I realized that life often gives us unexpected lessons about love, honesty, and the courage to confront our own emotions. Sometimes the most meaningful connections are not the ones that are shouted from the rooftops, but the ones felt deeply in silence, shared in a glance, or whispered in trust. I felt gratitude for Eric, for his honesty, and for the way he had allowed me to see a different facet of human connection. And I felt gratitude for Tom, for the life we had built together, and for the understanding that love doesn't always need to be complicated to be real. That weekend in Vermont had been more than a trip. It had been a journey into the heart, a reminder that emotional courage can transform ordinary moments into something extraordinary. And as I sit here now, recounting this story to you, I feel the same quiet warmth, the same gentle truth that made those days unforgettable. Life is full of unexpected revelations, and sometimes the most profound ones arrive not with fanfare, but in the stillness of a shared moment, the honesty of a confession, and the simple courage to face our own hearts.